obscure, inventive, and just absolutely characterful games. And World of Twilight, Chronicles of Anyaral is definitely one of those. So yeah, this is World of Twilight, a really neat little fantasy skirmish game made by a guy named Michael Thorpe. And it is one of the most creative and inventive and unique things I've ever seen in this hobby. Perhaps the most insanely cool thing about this game is that it's a fantasy game, but it's not your standard fantasy game. There's no humans, there's no Legolas elves, there's no Gimli cloned dwarves, there's no giant green orcs because nobody has any freaking creativity anymore. No, instead you have this really unique world with completely unique inhabitants that are basically dinosaur people. And dinosaurs are awesome. So yeah, you have an entirely unique premise, which I absolutely love because it's so good to see somebody doing something creative and unique and different instead of just rehashing the same 3 or 4 bland, tired, not fun cliches 1,000 freaking more times. Right off the bat, this game's already a huge hit for me. So let's start, as we do, by talking about the book. So this book's actually kind of cool, and I know I griped on Counterblast's rulebook in the last video for being too small, and you might be thinking, well, this isn't much bigger, but this has kind of a charm to its size because it feels kind of like a notebook. It's got this beautiful art on the cover and on the back, and everybody's going to call me a hypocrite for this, but I love the art in this book. And they're going to call me a hypocrite because the art's in black and white. I'm always bitching about how things shouldn't be black and white. But I really feel like this gives the game kind of a charm. It makes it feel like a sketchbook. It makes it feel like somebody's diary that they carried around in this world and just drew what they saw and wrote about the things they saw. Plus, on top of that, every single picture of a miniature in this book is in full, glorious color, as it should be. Now, a few years back, I did a little review of this for the magazine I used to write for, but I only did it of the first book. Now, there's 3 books contained inside this book. There's Slaves to Emperors, Of Gods and Demons, and Travels Through Anyaral. And each of them outlines different stuff and covers different parts of the story. And I think that's really cool, and it is really awesome that this got compiled into one book. So, thanks everybody else who backed the Kickstarter with me. And you get quite a bit of stuff in this book. It's just shy of 150 pages. You get fluff, you get armies, you get a ton of scenarios, you get all the rules. You get a lot out of this game, and I'm absolutely adoring it. Now, there is plenty of fluff in here that covers different things, but I will admit a slight disappointment that I kind of wish it went into more detail. I would love to know more about these races. I would love to know more about the history, and I would love to know more about just everything in this world because it really is fascinating. It really does draw me in. And I assume that we'll get more as more books are printed, but I kind of wish they'd just gone a tiny bit deeper than it did. So let's talk about the rules, because this is the other place where this game really comes to life and really feels unique. Now, most other games either use what I consider the boring, tired, not very fun I go, you go system, where one player does all of their turn and then a player does all of their turn, and I don't like that. Other games will do alternating activation, like how Warzone or AT-43 did it, where one player activates a unit and then another player activates a unit. How this game does it is you have these. Each player has a bunch of these little initiative tokens that are placed into a bag. And you reach in, you randomly draw one, and that'll tell you whose turn it is. And that player then gets to activate a model. There's also a third color of initiative marker, and these initiate a combat round. You can fight combats outside of a designated combat round with different special abilities, but when one of these is drawn, everything stops and everybody just starts wailing on each other, and it's kind of awesome. Another great thing about this game is its inherent simplicity. Models have very few stats. They have movement, combat, support, stamina, and tough. They only have 5 stats you have to keep track of. And with the fancy new stat cards that are being printed out, you don't even have to keep track of them. Now, one cool thing is very similar to Counterblast. Certain models will have certain abilities that will let you activate other models with them. So they'll have like the command ability or what have you. They'll be called different things, but they'll let you activate up to a number of models within their command range, which is really kind of cool because it lets you kind of converge models and activate like a unit. And I like that. In a skirmish game where you're normally going one model at a time, it's nice to have a way to kind of gang up on somebody, and really it gives you more strategy, it gives you more tactics, it gives you more options, because otherwise the game would be very limited in what you can do. But with the rather large number of special abilities that models have, you can do all sorts of cool stuff. Now, as an aside, I don't know if this is going to be available separately. I got this in my Kickstarter package, but this is a two-sided sheet of all the different special abilities that models have. And there's quite a few, and they all do really neat things. So it's kind of handy to have this because the stat cards themselves don't tell you what they do. Now, when a combat is fought, that's kind of where the game gets interesting because it's kind of a diceless system. You see, when you get into a combat, your combat score tells you how many combat stones you get. And combat stones are these little guys. And there's one that's attack and one that's defend. And you have to kind of choose and bluff and outwit your opponent on how you're going to do combat, because you might want to go really combat heavy and be very aggressive and play a lot of attack, or you might want to be very defensive and play a lot of defense, or you might want to be a mixture of both. It really depends on the situation, but it offers a cool thing where you can kind of try and outwit your opponent and you bluff and you see if you can make them do one thing while you do another. And I think it's really kind of creative. Now, in the book, it refers to this as casting your combat stones. And this is really my only major gripe with the book. It doesn't necessarily explain how you're supposed to do that. You see, in the gameplay videos that Mr. Thorpe put online, he uses cups and kind of rattles them around. And I guess you could just rattle them in your hand like dice, and then you kind of plop them on the table, and anyone that's face up counts as succeeding. Anything that's face down, i.e. blank, counts as not succeeding. So I feel like that could have been explained, like maybe just a sentence or two in there to really say, hey, by the way, this is how you cast. But otherwise, it's fine. And it might seem very straightforward. Just one guy hits another and they just beat each other up. But then you have the support stat. And the support thing's really kind of a neat idea. And I actually really like it because models with a support score can get into a fight and lend support. So for example, if you have a Fubarni Knight, he has a combat of 3. A Fubarni Militia has a combat of 2, but he has a support of 1. So if they're both attacking the same model, you can use the Knight's combat of 3 and then have the Militia support him and essentially give him an extra stone, which gives you better chances of hitting. And then special abilities on top of that. And that's really, really cool. I really like that because it does, again, it opens up a lot of tactical depth and it means you get a lot of options on what you're going to do because it's not just one guy hitting another guy, hitting another guy. You can have these huge chains of combat if everybody in base contact is involved in a fight. And it does mean you kind of have to pick and choose if you have a bunch of guys in a combat, but they also have other enemies in base with them, who's going to fight where. You have to pick, well, am I going to try and kill the big guy or am I going to try and spread my attacks and wipe out the little guys? If you manage to get an attack through and you have more attack stones come up than your opponent's defense stones or vice versa, then you have to make tough rolls. And this is where the only dice in the game come in. And every model has a tough score. It'll be something plus. So it's basically, if they have a 5 plus, you need to roll a 5 or better on a 6-sided die to have them not get killed. And this brings me to my only real point of contention with the game. I kind of wish models had a health stat. Because you have really big models that might have a really high tough score. There's certain models that have like a 3 up tough. But every model only has 1 hit point. So the second it gets hit, it dies. And I don't know. I feel like maybe there should be something else in there. And usually those big models have an ability that lets them recast stones or lets them re-roll tough rolls or lets them just flip over stones so they can either make their opponents not hit them through getting rid of their attacks or make it so their opponents don't hit them through boosting their own defense. But it still feels a little weird. Now, mind you, it doesn't diminish the game. The game is still really, really cool, and it's really solidly written with that minor flub about not telling you how to cast stones. And I'm absolutely in love with it. The weird thing is, when I first heard about this game, I thought it was really cool and really, unique and creative. And when I read the rules, I was kind of on them. But as I've read them more and more, and as I've gotten my hands on the actual book, and I've seen gameplay videos, I realized this is a really solid game, and it's really, really cool, and it's really creative and unique. And there's really not much else out there like it. The only other game, at least miniatures game wise, that I can think of that involves that kind of bluffing element in your combat is Bushido, which hopefully I'll get around to reviewing at some point when I get a rulebook. But I absolutely love that, combined with that random initiative, which reminds me of like bolt action with its order dice. And both of those things from those two different games, I love. And combining them with this absurdly unique setting has really made me appreciate how absolutely beautiful World of Twilight really is. There's also a campaign in here where it's designed for 3 players, one person playing Delgon, one person playing Devenu, and one person playing Fubarni. Because the Dogu are technically part of the Delgon culture, but they're their own culture in a way. Like, they're allies, basically, so they don't get represented in the campaign, which is kind of unfortunate, but I can see where they're coming from. But the campaign's pretty neat because it's a series of scenarios, and depending on the outcome of those scenarios, the winner will get different stuff. So like the first scenario is Fubarni versus Devenu, and then the second scenario is Delgon versus Devenu, and then there's Fubarni versus Delgon, and then there's like a big 3-player brawl. And it's really neat, and it's not quite as much as I had hoped, but it's still a lot better than Counterblast. Yeah, little foobar of a campaign. Now let's talk very briefly about the models for this game, because I absolutely love them. They're really, really characterful. They're just oozing with personality, even though they aren't the most emotive creatures. They aren't the most detailed models. I mean, I've got more detailed models all over my desk, but still, there's something about them that just, they're so cool, and I love them, and I love the design, I love the aesthetic of it, and everything about it is so unique. So, what's my overall verdict on this game? It's awesome. It is a crazy cool game with an awesome setting. It's unique and creative, and it's just not like anything else I've ever seen. The models are really just absolutely characterful. I love that he went out on a limb and made a fantasy game that doesn't follow the same boring tropes, and he made a really creative rule set that is fun to play, and it has its charm, and it's really, really well done. This game could have been like any other game on the market, but it's completely different, and being different is what makes it work. I mean, yeah, it's weird, it's strange, it's unusual, but that's what makes it so awesome, because it's not the same. So yeah, I really can't suggest this game anymore. It's so good. If you get a chance when this book hits retail, and I have no idea when that'll be or how much it'll cost, pick it up, play it. It is so good, and it deserves your attention for being so unique, for being willing to go out on a limb, and for being willing to try something new. It's an awesome game, and I really, really can't wait to see what happens next, because there are so many other cultures in this world on just the continent of Anyaral that are there to be explored. And there's a whole rest of a world that we don't even know about. So, World of Twilight, Chronicles of Anyaral, amazing game. Highly suggest picking it up. I want to thank you all for watching. Don't forget you can follow us on Facebook and Twitter by checking out the links below. I will hopefully in the future have more World of Twilight stuff, from gameplay videos and maybe some modeling videos. Don't forget, tell your friends, tell your gaming club about us if you really like our videos and you want to kind of expose other people to these little games like I do. Let people know, because apparently Tabletop Gaming News isn't very keen on publishing our videos all of a sudden. So once again, thanks guys for watching, and I'll catch you later.